Hi, thanks for joining me again. Hope you're having a good day. I'm Gary Zacharias, and this is the Apologist Bookshelf. This will be a second look at a book called Confident Faith by Mark Mittelberg. He's an author. He's got this thing called Becoming a Contagious Christian course, and he's the author of that. And he also co-directs the Institute at Cherry Hills in Denver, Colorado. At least that's what he did a few years ago. I'm not sure how up-to-date that information is. But Mark, I like his writing. It's easy. It's something we can all understand, and it gives us a lot of good depth of information about apologetic issues. So this one is Confident Faith, subtitled Building a Firm Foundation for Your Beliefs. And I already did a podcast that talked about what is faith and who has it. So you can look back several podcasts and check that out if you want. I'm going to be using this book for an apologetics class I'm leading at my church. And so I will just kind of walk us through this book over several podcasts. The first section is called 6 Faith Paths. In other words, just about everybody you can put on one of these paths to try to figure out their spiritual goals and what they believe about the big issues of life. Then the second part is called 20 Arrows of Truth, and that's 20 things that point toward the truth of Christianity. And then I like his last section, 10 Barriers to Belief. You know, so many books tell you the good things about Christianity, and that's fine. That's wonderful to have. But many of them don't deal with the objections that people have, the fair objections, the concerns that people have. So he's got that as his third section, 10 Barriers to Belief. So I'd like to walk through what he's going to talk about at the beginning here, which are those 6 faith paths. And just to give you the big picture, the paths that people are on, one is called the relativistic faith path. The second is traditional, then authoritarian, and then intuitive, mystical, and the last one is evidential. And then he subtitles each one. So what's the relativistic faith path? Truth is whatever works for you. What's the traditional faith path? Truth is what you've always been taught. Authoritarian, truth is what you've been told you must believe. Intuitive, truth is what you feel in your heart. Mystical, truth is what you think God told you. And then the last one, evidential, truth is what logic and evidence points to. Now, you can probably guess, and I'm sure you feel the same way I do, that we as Christians, let's hope we're on the evidential faith path. In other words, we believe Christianity not because it warms our heart or because we have some friends who are Christians or because our parents told us that'd be a good idea, but we're Christians because logic and evidence point to Christianity being true. I don't know about you, but I'm only a Christian because I think it's true. If it's not true, I got better things I could do with my life. I don't need to be involved in this kind of stuff if it's all nonsense, just a feel-good kind of thing. Well, I can get a feel-good from a lot of different things. I don't need this. But we believe logic and evidence points to it. It's true. That's why we're Christians. So let's do this. Let's go back to the first one, the relativistic faith path. Truth is whatever works for you. Boy, do we hear that a lot. We hear that thing, true for you. Have you heard that before? We should just accept each other, and we all have our own truths. Let's just get along and pat each other on the head and just kumbaya, join hands, and there you go. The idea is that if you're a relativist, that truth is perspectival. In other words, it's how you see the woman. How you see the world. Because if you had he says if there was a poor peasant woman in Peru, she would see the world very differently than you do. Her truth is going to be different than your truth. So we're just all kind of limited. We're kind of stuck with our own ideas. Nobody can see through my eyes, and I can't see through anybody else's eyes. And so there's no objectivity anywhere. We can't see the big picture. We're just kind of stuck in our own personal perspectives. So you can see where this is going. The truth is what fits your set of beliefs. So it's true for you, but not necessarily true for anybody else. Now, I like what he does. So I think he's been very fair. He's been honest about what the person believes if they're a relativist. And now he comes up with some of the problems. And you may have thought of these already. But he says, here's one problem with that theory. It speaks as if it knows true truth. It presents itself, the statement, that that's true for you but not for anybody else. That's the exception. It rises above its own rule. So what are we talking about there? So it says that truth is limited to the individual, right? But the claim is making a claim about everybody, but that's not relativist then. You've got to limit your claim to the point of view of the person making the claim, so it's not relevant or binding on the rest of us. Well, but if that theory is binding on the rest of us, then that's the exception that proves that all truth really is not perspectival. That's a self-defeating contradiction. So somebody comes up to you and says, well, that's true for you, but not for me. That person just made a statement that said it was about you and that person. Does that make sense? Here's another problem. Have you noticed he says how often people on that path urge others to share their perspective? Well, wait a minute. So what you're doing, what that person is doing, if they're trying to move people from that position to theirs, that's inconsistent. So the proponents of the view really do believe that some ideas are objective enough to allow us to rise above our individual perspectives so we could come to the same conclusion. So apparently some truth is true for everyone, but that's self-defeating. Now, Mittelberg points out that this faith path has some good features, the whole getting along thing, tolerance. That's great. And Mittelberg also said, I think it's great that each person should be allowed to practice his or her own faith. That's wonderful. So we should have legal rights for a wide range of religions. So religious tolerance is great, and I'm with him. That's wonderful. I agree. Religious tolerance. If I have friends or co-workers or whatever, and they have a different faith path than mine, okay, we all want to be tolerant, not put somebody in jail, not harass them. That's great. But Mittelberg says, okay, religious tolerance is good, but saying that everybody's beliefs are true, he said that's incoherent. Oh, that's exactly right. So if I'm a Buddhist and somebody else is a Catholic and somebody else is a Jehovah's Witness, okay, we're going to be tolerant. We're not going to blow up their house or do something awful to them. But to say that the Buddhist and the Jehovah's Witness and the Catholic, everybody's belief is true, that seems crazy because they have such different beliefs. He said that's incoherent. So he said, what do you do with somebody who's, let's say, an atheist? So he uses Richard Dawkins. Everybody likes to use Richard Dawkins as their favorite atheist. You know why? Because he's outspoken, he's blunt, and frankly, he makes some pretty crazy comments. But, so for Richard Dawkins, God doesn't exist. But Mittelberg says for someone else who's a Christian, God does exist. He says, do you see the problem? So if you say both beliefs are true, then God does and does not exist at the same time for two different people based on their own beliefs. But that doesn't make any sense. He says, well, what about a Hindu? You bring in a Hindu. Now we've got a Hindu and a Christian talking. So the Hindu says the whole material world is illusory. It's called Maya. It's just part of the mind of the pantheistic one, capital O. Then for the Hindu, everything is God. Well, yeah, but wait a minute. So God doesn't exist for Dawkins. God exists for the Christian as a separate being, but now the Hindu says everything is God. So this is confusing. That doesn't make any sense. So he says, let's get back to the issue here. What is truth? And Mittelberg says truth is just what's real. It's not my private reality or anybody else's. It's the way things actually are. Truth is what really exists, and what really doesn't exist, it just doesn't exist. He says, if relativism happened to be true, and a person had this sincere belief that gasoline was good for humans, you'd need to drink gasoline and you pour orange juice into your car because it's good for cars, then everything should work out fine. He said, yeah, but that doesn't work that way. You don't drink gasoline, and you don't put orange juice in cars. He said, try this. Next time you're on a road trip and you're going down a highway, you decide in your mind what works for me, and you say, I'll take that number 110 on the highway and I'll assume that's the speed limit. And then you get pulled over. By the way, I really like stories. I think stories can help illustrate a lot of points here. He says, all right, he says, so the officer pulls you over, and you say, well, I took that sign as the speed limit is 110 miles an hour. And then the cop says, well, I see that you're sincere, and he'll just smile and send you on your way. Really? No, the cop is going to hold you to his truth that the real speed limit was 65, and you're going to get a speeding ticket. Right. He said, so this old-fashioned idea of understanding what truth is, we really want it. We need it to live our lives by. We don't want to live a life of lies. So he said we've got to avoid inventing some kind of fantasy version of reality within our own minds. That's called a delusion, if you think about it. So, yeah, he said we've got to find out what truly is real, and then you align your life to that reality. So he said when you get to the world of spiritual matters, he said people go back to relativism very quickly. You know, this thing about gasoline and orange juice, which to put in the car and which to put in you. He said people go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. You know, there's a true reality out there. But the minute you get into spiritual things, then people go, oh, whatever is true for you. He said, I think part of the problem is religious faith deals in the realm of the invisible. He said the realities are harder to verify. So I like that. He's being honest there. He said, but we got to realize whatever's real in the spiritual realm was already real before we arrived. And then he gets into this thing about sincerity. He says sincerity doesn't change reality. You could be sincere, but sincerely wrong. And you know what I think of? I jotted a note here I'm going to share with the class. Where have we encountered groups that were sincere, so their heart was in it, which is nice, but they were sincerely wrong? I can think of Heaven's Gate. Do you remember that? Years back, there was an organization that believed that there was a spaceship on the other side of a comet, and if you died, you free your body and you'd go to that spaceship. Well, yeah, so they all died. Said, so you can be sincerely wrong. Here's another point he brings up. Nobody really believes every religion is true. He said, that's the kind of thing people say when they don't think anybody's going to press them on it. But we all draw lines in the sand somewhere. You got Jim Jones. Do you think that was a good idea? David Koresh, they burned inside Waco, Branch Davidian. He said, when you encounter different groups, then they teach contradictory ideas about God. Is there one God? Is there a bunch of gods? Is there no God? They teach a bunch of different ideas about faith. They teach a lot of different ideas about spiritual matters. I mean, for heaven's sakes, just think about what happens to you when you die. Groups have all sorts of different ideas. Some say you come back, you reincarnate. Some say you just lie in the ground and rot. Some say you go to heaven. Some say you go to like purgatory. So they can't all be right. You can't rot and reincarnate and go to be with God. They can't all represent what is. He said, deep down, we all think we're right and that anybody who disagrees with us is wrong. They said, none of this really proves who is right. He hasn't gotten to that yet. He said, just lays some ground rules down there. And I like this. You must look for genuine truth and reality. You have to accurately be able to describe what is, even in areas we can't see. And by the way, I've done a talk. I'll be glad to share it with you if you want to email me, or you go onto my website, apologeticsforlife.org. I've done a talk on the existence of the soul. We can't see it. We can't measure it, but there are some indirect ways that we can determine that we do have souls. And so even in areas we can't see, we can make some pretty accurate determinations. So he says, all right, so where do we start? This is toward the end of the chapter. He said, well, we've got to cling to what's real. You have to love truth. That's what it says in the Old Testament. We've got to be willing to seek and accept what really is the case, even if it's something that in the past we accepted and then somebody tells us no and we're confused by that. We just have to be willing to accept what's really the case. Maybe we were raised a different way. We can't go by what we wish for in the present. He said, if the relativistic path led you to faith in Jesus, that's great. But he said, if you want to be really confident that you've chosen a faith that's true and will last, he says we need to get off the relativistic faith path. And so this chapter was for the people who might have been on that faith path. He said, let's stop placing our faith in what works and track down what's really true. And that's going to be his last chapter of these different faith paths. That's the evidential faith path. And then the challenge at the end here says, once we've discovered what really is true, let's take the courageous step of aligning our beliefs and actions to the truth that we discovered. So it's not enough to come up with maybe the truth, but you've got to change beliefs and actions to that truth that they've discovered. So that's his first type of faith path, called the relativistic faith path. And we see it all over the place, don't we, these days? I hear that business about what's true for you all the time. People will even use an example. This is not in Mittelberg's book, but just something I'm thinking of right now. People will use the example of the blind men and the elephant. Have you heard that illustration? Supposedly in a small village in India, somebody brings an elephant in, and people haven't seen or interacted with an elephant before, and there's several blind men there, and they want to see the elephant, quote unquote, see it. They want to experience. So they're led up to the elephant. One touches the tusk and says to the others, "Oh, okay, I got it. An elephant's like a spear." Well, one is touching the ear and says, "No, you're crazy. It's not a spear. It's a fan." Another one is touching the broad side, and he said, "Why would you both say those things? You're completely mistaken. The elephant's like a wall." One's grabbed the tail, says, "No, it's a rope." One grabs the leg, says it's a pillar, and they start arguing really loudly until the chief of the village comes by and says, "Quiet, quiet. You all have a piece of the truth, but the elephant's different. It's bigger than what you think it is." There's relativism. Each one thinks his or her truth is correct for them, but they haven't got the big picture. Well, why is it that the one person can see, that chief? So do you see how that's pretty arrogant to say, "I can see, but nobody else can see"? So you got to watch out for things like that. Or all roads lead to heaven, all roads lead to God. You heard that one? Like there's a mountaintop, and the Hindus are going up one road, and the Buddhists are going up another, and the Christians are going up a third one, and they'll all end up at God. Well, that doesn't make any sense either, because they each have a different idea of God, and they each have a different idea of how you get there, and they have a different idea of what happens to you when you die, and so on. So these things don't work, these illustrations of relativism. So there is truth. There is truth, and truth applies in the unseen world as well as the seen world. So again, this is Mark Mittelberg's book called Confident Faith, and I think it's powerful, and I'm trying to decide. I may just continue marching through this book because it's got such good information there. It's an older book, and again, as I've said a bunch of times, just because it's older doesn't mean it's out of style or anything, because we still have the relativists among us. This is about a 10-year-old book. But I think you'd like it, and you might be able to pick it up cheap different places. So thanks for listening, and we'll do another podcast really soon, and I hope you're having a good day.